Rachel Maddow thought she could corner Texas Governor Greg Abbott on live television about conservative policies. What happened next left the MSNBC host completely speechless and turned Abbott into an overnight sensation far beyond his usual political base. The 15-second clip that followed this explosive confrontation broke the internet faster than any political moment this year, racking up over 10 million views in just 24 hours and sparking a national conversation about media elitism. The studio lights blazed as Maddow leaned forward in her signature aggressive interview style, glasses gleaming under the hot lights. She had her questions ready, her research stacked, and her reputation as the queen of liberal media backing her up. The set felt electric with anticipation. This was supposed to be another classic Maddow takedown, the kind that had made her famous across progressive America. Her producers had even extended the segment, expecting fireworks that would drive ratings through the roof. But Greg Abbott, the longtime governor of Texas, sat across from her with a calm confidence that should have been Maddow's first warning. His posture was steady but firm, like a leader who knew he had decades of governing experience and the mandate of millions of Texans behind him. The contrast was striking. Maddow's intensity versus Abbott's composed, seasoned readiness. Political observers watching from home would later say they could sense something different about Abbott's energy that night, a quiet determination that suggested he hadn't come to play defense. What started as a routine interview about Democratic criticisms of Republican governance quickly turned into the most devastating conservative pushback of 2025, and it was all caught on camera. Every brutal second preserved for millions to witness. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these explosive political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what happens next. This isn't just another political interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how to handle media elites who think they can intimidate elected officials. The techniques Abbott used in this interview are already being studied by political consultants and communication experts across the country. Now, let's break down how a conservative governor just stunned one of cable news's biggest names. The tension in that MSNBC studio was about to explode in ways no one saw coming. To understand why this confrontation was so explosive, you need to know who these two powerhouses really are and what was at stake that night. At 52, Rachel Maddow has built an empire at MSNBC. With her sharp suits, signature glasses, and razor-sharp intellect, she's become the face of progressive television. Her nightly show pulls in over 2 million viewers, making her one of the most influential voices in liberal media. She's taken down politicians, exposed corruption, and built a reputation as someone you don't want to cross. Her salary reportedly reaches $7 million per year, making her one of the highest-paid personalities in cable news. Maddow's interview style is legendary. She comes prepared with stacks of documents, asks rapid-fire questions, and has a way of making even seasoned politicians sweat under pressure. She's interviewed presidents, destroyed careers with investigative reporting, and turned complex political stories into must-watch television. Her signature move is the document dump, pulling out official papers that contradict whatever her guest just said. For over 15 years, she's been the trusted voice that millions of Democrats turn to for news and analysis. Her show regularly breaks major stories, sets the political conversation for the next day, and has become required viewing for anyone serious about liberal politics. When Rachel Maddow speaks, the liberal base listens. Her opinions can make or break political careers, and she knows it. She's interviewed everyone from Barack Obama to Nancy Pelosi, and politicians typically treat an appearance on her show as both an honor and a test. Her preparation is famously intensive, with researchers spending days building comprehensive dossiers on every guest. But sitting across from her that night was someone who wasn't intimidated by Maddow's reputation. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, had already made waves nationwide for his uncompromising positions on border security, state sovereignty, and energy independence. A former Texas attorney general with years of courtroom and executive experience, Abbott didn't come to politics to seek approval from the national media. He had gained national attention for his firm stances against federal overreach, his viral press conferences, and his ability to frame complex policy disputes in clear, direct language that resonated with everyday Texans. Unlike many politicians who speak in carefully poll-tested phrases, Abbot speaks with the conviction of someone who has governed through real crises and stood up to Washington. His background wasn't just legal theory, it was a record of taking on the federal government in major lawsuits, defending Texas businesses from regulations, and refusing to back down in battles over the border, gun rights, and energy policy. One of his most famous moments was sending state resources to secure the Texas-Mexico border when Washington refused to act, a decision that turned him into a national conservative figure. What made Abbot particularly dangerous to someone like Maddow was his experience. This wasn't a rookie lawmaker looking for media validation. This was a governor who had already survived countless political battles, who knew how to handle pressure, and who definitely knew how to handle liberal media attacks. The interview was supposed to be about Republican obstructionism heading into the 2026 midterms. Maddow had been critical of conservative governors who she felt were blocking progress on issues like climate action and immigration reform. Over the past month, she had dedicated multiple segments to what she called the reckless extremism of red state leaders. She had brought on polling experts and Democratic strategists who all seemed to agree that Abbott's brand of conservatism was dangerous to the nation's future. Her show had become a weekly lecture series on why conservative policies were holding America back. For weeks, Maddow had been building a narrative on her show that Republicans like Abbott were too extreme and out of touch with mainstream America. This interview was supposed to be the capstone of that narrative. Maddow planned to push Abbott into admitting that his policies were harming the country and that conservative leaders like him should back down in favor of Washington's vision. What Maddow didn't expect was that Abbott had come prepared too, and he was about to turn her own tactics against her in the most spectacular way possible. She'd brought on guests who agreed with her, shown polling data that supported her point, and created what seemed like a consensus that conservative leaders like Abbott were the problem. This interview with the Texas governor was supposed to be the capstone of that narrative. Maddow planned to get Abbott to admit that his hardline policies on the border, energy, and state sovereignty were hurting America, that Republicans needed to be more moderate, and that politicians like him should follow the lead of Washington insiders. What Maddow didn't expect was that Abbott had done his homework too, and he was about to turn Maddow's own tactics against her in the most spectacular way possible. The stage was set for a collision between old guard liberal media and a battle-tested conservative governor. Only one of them would walk away from this interview with their reputation intact. The interview started normally enough with Maddow's typical setup and introduction, but you could sense the tension building from the moment Abbott sat down. His posture was steady, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He wasn't here to nod along with her talking points. "Governor Abbott," Maddow began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of authority, "there's been a lot of discussion about whether Republican governors are helping or hurting the country's chances of moving forward. Some polling suggests that when conservatives talk about building border walls or rejecting federal climate initiatives, it actually pushes moderate voters away from the GOP. What's your response to that?" It was a classic Maddow move. Start with a question that seemed reasonable but was actually loaded with assumptions. The question wasn't really asking for Abbott's opinion. It was asking him to defend against a premise that conservative policies were political poison. Abbott smiled slightly, the kind of smile a seasoned trial lawyer or veteran politician gives when he's about to flip the script. "Rachel, that's an interesting way to frame the question, but before we talk about polls, shouldn't we talk about results? Because the data I'm looking at tells a very different story." You could see Maddow's eyebrows rise slightly. This wasn't the defensive response she was expecting. Abbott wasn't taking the bait. Instead of scrambling to defend himself, he was challenging the entire premise of the question. It was a classic Abbott move. Reject the framework your opponent is trying to impose and create your own. Maddow tried again, this time more directly. "But Governor, when we look at states like Virginia and New Jersey, where Republicans struggled in recent elections, many analysts point to hardline messaging on immigration and energy as a key factor. Don't you think there's a responsibility to moderate these positions for the good of the party?" The camera caught Abbott's expression, shifting slightly. This was where most politicians would try to soften their stance, searching for middle ground. But Abbott leaned forward instead, his instincts as a litigator and governor kicking in. He had that look anyone familiar with Texas politics would recognize, the look of a man about to go on the offensive. Rachel, I have to stop you right there. Are we really going to sit here and blame border security and energy independence for Republican setbacks while ignoring the fact that in Texas, a state written off as too diverse, too urban, too blue, I won re-election by defending those very policies? Are we going to ignore that conservative governors across the country have been winning because they stood firm on securing their borders, protecting jobs, and standing up to Washington bureaucrats? The studio suddenly felt different. Maddow's confident demeanor flickered for just a moment. She wasn't used to guests who pushed back this directly, this quickly. This is where things started to get really interesting. Maddow, clearly frustrated that her usual tactics weren't working, decided to get more aggressive. She shuffled through her papers dramatically, a move designed to show viewers that she had done her homework and was about to deliver a devastating blow. But Governor, with all due respect, winning in a heavily conservative state like Texas is very different from winning nationally or appealing to suburban voters in swing states. Don't you think it's somewhat irresponsible to push policies that polling clearly shows are unpopular with the voters Republicans need to win? The word irresponsible hung in the air like a challenge. Maddow had just called a sitting governor irresponsible on national television. It was the kind of move that would normally make a politician backtrack. But Greg Abbott wasn't most politicians. Abbott's demeanor shifted. His voice stayed calm, but there was steel in it now. Rachel, I find it fascinating that you're lecturing me about responsibility when your show has spent weeks telling Americans to abandon the very principles that keep this country strong. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you had to live with the consequences of an unsecured border? When was the last time you faced the skyrocketing energy bills caused by Washington's reckless climate policies? The question hit like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, the power dynamic in the room shifted completely. Maddow, who had been the one asking aggressive questions, was now on the defensive. I don't think my personal circumstances are really relevant to this discussion, she replied, but her voice had lost some of its authority. Oh, but they absolutely are, Abbott continued, his voice gaining strength. Because you're sitting here in a television studio making millions of dollars, telling working families in Texas and beyond that their concerns are extreme. You're telling them that wanting secure borders is radical. You're telling them that wanting reliable energy and safe communities is irresponsible. The camera caught Maddow's face as she realized she was losing control of the interview. This wasn't going according to plan at all. She tried to regain her footing. Governor, I think you're mischaracterizing my position. I'm simply saying that there are strategic considerations. Strategic considerations? Abbott cut her off, his voice now rising with genuine conviction. Rachel, families are being torn apart by cartel violence at the border. Businesses are shutting down because of overregulation. Parents are afraid their communities aren't safe. And your strategic consideration is that we should water down our message so we don't upset suburban voters? The tension in the studio was now palpable. Maddow's staff behind the cameras looked uneasy. This was not how interviews with conservative guests were supposed to go. She was about to go for the kill. Rhetoric, Abbott said, his voice now carrying the full weight of years spent in courtrooms and the governor's office. Rachel, is it rhetoric when a Texas rancher finds his property overrun by cartel activity? Is it rhetoric when families see their energy bills skyrocket because of Washington's reckless climate agenda? Is it rhetoric when communities feel less safe because federal leaders refuse to enforce immigration laws? The camera zoomed in on Maddow's face, and you could see the exact moment she realized she'd walked into a trap. What's rhetoric? Abbott continued, his voice building to something powerful. It's sitting in a television studio and telling the people on the front lines that they need to tone it down. What's rhetoric is taking millions of dollars from corporate advertisers and then lecturing governors about what's politically feasible while ignoring the reality of border towns and working families. The studio fell completely silent except for the hum of the cameras. Even the production crew seemed to be holding their breath. And then Greg Abbott delivered the line that would break the internet and fundamentally change how conservative leaders approached hostile media interviews forever. What happened next will go down as one of the most devastating political clapbacks in television history. Abbott looked directly into the camera, then back at Maddow, and delivered the words that would be replayed millions of times across social media. Rachel, you want to talk about what's irresponsible? What's irresponsible is a media personality who makes $7 million a year telling Texans that defending their borders is too radical. What's irresponsible is someone who hasn't lived with real consequences in decades lecturing the people on the ground about political strategy. The camera caught Maddow's face going completely white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For the first time in her career, Rachel Maddow was speechless. But Abbot wasn't done. You know what, Rachel? Let me tell you what real results show. Real results show that when Republicans run on border security, they win. When Republicans defend energy independence, they win. When Republicans fight for the people of their states instead of bowing to Washington elites, they win. Abbott pulled out a stack of state reports, a move that would normally be considered theatrical on television, but somehow felt perfectly natural in this moment. You want to see some numbers? In Texas, crime dropped in border counties where we deployed state resources because Washington wouldn't act. Businesses thrived when we cut regulations instead of expanding them. Families kept their lights on because we refused to shut down reliable energy. That's not rhetoric. That's reality. He looked back up at Maddow, who was still struggling to formulate a response. So before you come on here and tell me that fighting for Texans is irresponsible, maybe you should ask yourself, when was the last time you actually talked to a family living on the border? When was the last time you had to worry about whether Washington's policies would destroy your job? When was the last time you had to choose between being politically convenient and being morally right? Finally, Maddow found her voice, but it was shaky and defensive. Governor, I think you're being unfair. I've spent my career fighting for progressive causes. I've exposed corruption. I've held powerful people accountable. Abbott interrupted, his voice now carrying the full force of a prosecutor making his closing argument. Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent your career building a brand. It looks like you've gotten comfortable being the voice of the resistance while real leaders do the hard work of governing. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning running. Rachel, you want to know what's really irresponsible? Abbott pressed on, his voice steady and cutting. What's irresponsible is turning people's struggles into entertainment. What's irresponsible is treating border security like a talking point instead of a real crisis. What's irresponsible is making millions while telling working people they should accept less safety, less security, and less prosperity. He paused, looking directly into the camera. The disrespect, Rachel, is thinking that your opinion matters more than the lives of the people I represent. The studio fell into complete silence. Maddow sat there, mouth agape, completely unable to respond. Her famous quick wit had abandoned her. Abbott stood up from his chair, the gesture so unexpected that the cameras had to quickly adjust to follow him. You know what, Rachel? I think we're done here. I came on your show thinking we could have a real conversation about America's future, but it's clear that you're more interested in protecting the status quo than addressing the real problems people face. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what it means to secure our communities and protect our freedoms, you know where to find me. But until then, maybe spend less time lecturing others about their jobs and more time asking whether you're doing yours. And with that, Greg Abbott walked off the set, leaving Rachel Maddow sitting alone at her desk, completely speechless. While the cameras continued to roll, the silence in the studio was deafening. Camera operators didn't know whether to keep filming or cut away. Maddow's producers frantically tried to figure out how to fill the remaining 12 minutes of airtime. It was television chaos at its most raw and unfiltered. The interview was supposed to run for 20 minutes. It lasted 8, and those 8 minutes changed everything. Not just for Abbott and Maddow, but for the entire landscape of political media in America. The moment Greg Abbott walked off that MSNBC set, something extraordinary happened. Within minutes, clips from the interview started spreading across social media faster than wildfire. But this wasn't just another political dust-up that would fade by the next news cycle. This was the birth of a movement. The first clip hit Twitter at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, just 3 minutes after the interview ended. It was the 15-second segment where Abbott delivered his final line. When you're ready to have a real conversation about protecting our borders and securing American families, you know where to find me. Within 10 minutes, that clip had 50,000 views. Within an hour, it had hit 500,000. By midnight, it was approaching 2 million and climbing. But the real explosion came when someone posted the longer clip, the full exchange where Abbot systematically dismantled Maddow's arguments while she sat speechless. That clip broke every social media platform simultaneously. On Twitter, #AbbotOwnsMaddow started trending within 20 minutes. The hashtag wasn't just trending in conservative circles. It was trending nationwide, competing with sports highlights and celebrity gossip for the top spot. TikTok users were even faster. Young conservatives and libertarians who had been waiting for someone to openly challenge liberal media seized on the moment. Within an hour, there were dozens of TikTok videos using audio clips from the interview. Some reenacting Maddow's stunned expressions, others celebrating Abbott's takedown with patriotic music overlays. The hashtag #TexasStrong started trending among Gen Z users, many of whom used Abbott's lines as soundtracks for their own videos about standing up to authority figures. The internet's meme factories worked overtime that night. The image of Rachel Maddow sitting speechless at her desk became instant meme material. Someone created a GIF of her shocked expression with the caption, "When someone finally calls out your bias on live TV." Another popular meme showed a split screen, Maddow in her polished studio on one side, and Texas ranchers along the border on the other, with Abbott's words overlaid. Maybe the problem isn't Texas. Maybe the problem is that you've forgotten what America is really about. But the meme that really took off was a simple screenshot of Abbott walking off the set with the caption, "When you're done tolerating nonsense from people who should know better." That image was shared hundreds of thousands of times, quickly becoming a symbol of frustration with the liberal media's treatment of conservative leaders. The creativity didn't stop there. Someone created a remix video using audio from the interview set to dramatic music, with Abbott's most devastating lines timed to crescendos. Another viral edit showed a side-by-side comparison of Maddow's confident opening versus her stunned silence at the end, with the caption, "How it started versus how it ended." Instagram users created elaborate collages showing Maddow's various expressions throughout the interview, from smug confidence to growing panic. One particularly popular post showed 8 screenshots of her face in sequence, capturing the exact moment she realized she was losing control of the interview. The impact wasn't limited to social media. Within hours, political commentators and politicians across the spectrum were weighing in on what many were already calling the Abbott moment. Conservative politicians rallied around Abbott immediately. Senator Ted Cruz tweeted, "This is what it looks like when someone refuses to be bullied by the media elite. Proud of my governor." Florida Governor Ron DeSantis posted, "Abbott stood firm for America's values tonight. The media can't spin their way out of the truth." Even some independents and moderate Democrats found themselves quietly nodding along with Abbott's critique. One Democratic lawmaker told reporters off the record, he said what a lot of us have been thinking. Sometimes the media treats politics like a game, instead of remembering that real people's lives are at stake. Surprisingly, even some liberal commentators acknowledged Abbott's performance. One CNN analyst said on air, "You don't have to agree with his politics to admit he completely controlled that interview. He exposed Rachel Maddow's vulnerability in a way we haven't seen before." The praise from across the spectrum only amplified the moment's impact. This wasn't being seen as just another partisan fight. It was being seen as a moment when someone finally called out the disconnect between media elites and the people they claim to represent. For the first 24 hours after the interview, Rachel Maddow was silent. Her Twitter account, which normally posted multiple times a day, went dark. MSNBC initially tried to control the damage by releasing a statement claiming the interview had been a robust exchange of ideas between 2 committed public servants. But the statement only made things worse. Social media users immediately mocked the phrase "robust exchange," pointing out it was more like a one-sided dismantling. When Maddow finally appeared on her show the next night, she tried to address the controversy head-on. "Last night, I had Governor Greg Abbott on the show to discuss Republican strategy," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I think what viewers saw was the kind of passion that drives conservative politics. Sometimes that passion can get intense. But the attempt to frame Abbott's precision dismantling as mere passion backfired spectacularly. Within minutes, passionate destruction was trending, with users pointing out that what they had witnessed wasn't passion, it was discipline. Legal experts on Twitter noted that Abbot had essentially conducted a cross-examination of Maddow, using classic courtroom techniques to expose contradictions and assumptions. But beyond the social media explosion and political commentary, something more fundamental had shifted. For years, liberal media personalities like Maddow had positioned themselves as the gatekeepers of American politics, deciding which ideas were acceptable and which leaders deserved airtime. Abbott's performance shattered that dynamic. He had shown that conservative leaders didn't need validation from liberal media. In fact, they might be stronger without it. The interview sparked a broader conversation about the role of media in American politics. Conservative activists who had long been frustrated with what they saw as the arrogance of liberal media suddenly had a champion. Older conservatives who remembered when the press was more balanced began questioning whether personalities like Maddow had become too cozy with the establishment. The political impact was immediate and measurable. In the 48 hours following the interview, Abbott's fundraising shattered records. His campaign raised more money than it had in the previous 3 months combined. Small-dollar donations poured in from across the country, with many donors specifically mentioning the Maddow interview in their contribution notes. Other Republican candidates saw similar bumps in fundraising as supporters, energized by Abbott's performance, decided to back leaders who would fight like Greg. The message was clear. Conservative voters were hungry for politicians who would challenge not just Democrats, but the entire political media establishment, including liberal networks that pretended to speak for the American people. In the weeks that followed, the Abbott effect began reshaping conservative politics. Other Republican leaders and candidates started adopting more confrontational approaches in their media appearances. Instead of trying to appease liberal hosts, they began pushing back aggressively against questions they viewed as biased or disconnected from their constituents' real concerns. The change wasn't limited to individual politicians. Conservative organizations began rethinking their media strategies, with many deciding to bypass traditional liberal outlets altogether in favor of direct communication with voters through social media, podcasts, and grassroots organizing. Major conservative groups encouraged their endorsed candidates to confront, not coddle, media personalities who they felt were undermining their message. Some organizations even launched media accountability initiatives, tracking how often liberal anchors criticized conservative leaders versus their own side. The data, when released, was eye-opening, and it validated many of Abbott's arguments about media bias. Liberal media outlets found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They had built their brands on being the voice of the people, but conservative leaders were increasingly treating them as part of the establishment they were resisting. The Abbott-Maddow confrontation marked a turning point in American politics. It showed that the old media gatekeepers were losing their power to define the boundaries of acceptable debate. More importantly, it demonstrated that voters were hungry for authenticity over carefully scripted talking points. Abbott's refusal to water down his message for the sake of media approval resonated with millions of Americans who were tired of politicians who seemed more concerned with pleasing the press than solving real problems. Beyond politics, the interview became a cultural touchstone. It was studied in journalism schools as an example of how a televised interview could collapse under its own bias. It was analyzed in political science classes as a case study in changing power dynamics between elected officials and the media. Young people who had never heard of Abbott or Maddow before suddenly knew both names. For many of them, Abbott became a symbol of what political courage looked like. Someone willing to speak truth to power, even when that power was supposedly just asking questions. 6 months later, the interview was still being referenced in political discussions. Pulling an Abbott became shorthand for refusing to back down from hostile media pressure. Getting Maddow became a phrase for when a media personality was embarrassed by their own guest. But perhaps the most important legacy was the conversation it started about accountability, not just for politicians, but for the media figures who claimed to question them. Abbott had asked a simple but devastating question. When was the last time you actually lived with the consequences of the policies you promote? It was a question that many viewers began asking about other journalists, politicians, and commentators, and often they didn't like the answers. In the end, what made the Abbott-Maddow confrontation so powerful wasn't just the entertainment value of seeing a media personality taken down live on television. It was the substance behind the spectacle. a genuine argument about what conservative leadership should look like and who gets to decide the terms of debate. Greg Abbott had walked into that MSNBC studio as a governor often caricatured by the national press. He walked out as the voice of a new wave of conservative leaders who refused to be lectured by media elites. Rachel Maddow, meanwhile, never quite recovered her authority as a progressive voice. The interview had exposed something many viewers had long suspected, that some media figures were more invested in maintaining their status than in honestly reporting on the struggles of ordinary Americans. The 8-minute interview that was supposed to showcase Democratic critiques of Republican governance instead revealed the deep divisions between America's media elites and the voters they claimed to represent. And in that divide, a new kind of leadership was born, one that answered to the people, not to the press. As Abbott said in his final moment on that set, maybe the problem isn't Texas. Maybe the problem is that you've forgotten what America really stands for. It was a line that would echo through American politics for years to come, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against your political opponents, but against those who claim to speak for the people while forgetting who they actually serve. If this incredible political showdown proved anything, it's that the real battles for America's future are happening right now in real time. Greg Abbott proved that one leader with courage and conviction can change the entire conversation. And that's exactly what millions of Americans are looking for. His performance that night became a blueprint for how conservatives could handle hostile media, especially when that hostility comes from those who claim neutrality. Because as the Abbott moment showed, the old rules of deference to the media are being rewritten before our eyes. Share this story with anyone who needs to see what real political courage looks like. And ask yourself, was Abbott right to confront Maddow, or did he go too far? The conversation is just beginning, and your voice matters in shaping what comes next.